is taken from genome. So first you look at the curve which is given in the bottom of this graph. So this is mean velocity. Okay, mean velocity is plotted in y-axis. Just now we were discussing velocity. Okay, and velocity is inverse of cross-sectional area. So first you look at this cross-sectional area. You look at the velocity. Velocity is here, and this is inverse of cross-sectional area. This is the cross-sectional area, TA. So this TA is the total area. It is nothing but total cross-sectional area, right? So this is the total cross-sectional area which we are discussing, total cross-sectional area. So look at this total cross-sectional area curve. If you follow this curve, so you're finding out that cross-sectional area is suddenly rising to a very, very peak level, and that is at which vessel level? That is at the level of capillaries. Getting my point? So look at this yellow color highlight. Okay, yellow color highlight. This is the total area, cross-sectional area, and velocity of blood flow will be opposite, means minimum velocity. So now you look at this pink color, okay, highlight. So again I am highlighting. So velocity of blood flow is very, very high at the level of aorta, then it is reducing to a very, very minimum at the level of capillary, and then it is again rising towards the venous system, but that rise is never equal to the aortic blood flow velocity. So blood flow velocity is maximum at the level of this vessel, that is the aorta, and minimum at the level of this capillary, but it is rising towards the venous system. So if I give of mercury, this blood pressure is 60 millimeter of mercury at the level of this arterioles. Suddenly, it is dropping to 25 millimeter of mercury at the level of capillaries, right? So it was like this, 90, then 60. Suddenly, it is dropping to 25 millimeter of mercury. Why? Because arterioles. So whenever it is passing through the arterioles are the register. That's why sudden drop of blood pressure is occurring. Okay, so that is at the level of capillary. Now the average blood pressure at the level of these venules is around 15 millimeter of mercury, at the level of vein around 12 millimeter of mercury, and at the level of vena cava is very, very less, that is around 3 millimeter of mercury. So this way you may remember this average blood pressure, that is not very important, but you remember the diagram which is given here in cardiovascular system, that is Laplace law. Solve Laplace law, I hope. Okay, so this is the blood vessel, right? So if I look at the luminal pressure of this blood vessel, okay, so this pressure is the luminal pressure of this blood vessel. It is trying to causes distension of these blood vessels. So this is P pressure, luminal pressure. Now the tension which will be generated at the level of this vessel wall. So what is this vessel tension? What is this tension at the level of this vessel wall? Tension is the force which will try to tear up the blood vessel, which will try to rip up the blood vessels. That means these blood vessels are arranged like this. So tension means it will try to rip up this part of this blood vessel. So it is said that tension is that force which is trying to tear up the blood vessels. Okay. So there is a relationship between this tension on the vessel wall and the luminal pressure, and that relationship is by Laplace law, which is equal to P is equal to T upon R. R is nothing but the radius of this vessel. So if this is the radius of this vessel, then Laplace law is saying that P is equal to T upon R. That means I can calculate the tension on this vessel wall, that is T, is equal to P luminal pressure multiplied by radius of that vessel, and this is nothing but Laplace law. Now, what is the application of this Laplace law? This is applied in many aspects in cardiovascular system and respiratory system. But look at, according to the Laplace law, if I have a vessels with a large diameter vessel and a small diameter vessel. Suppose the small diameter vessel is capillary. Okay, the small diameter vessel is capillary, and this large diameter. This is applied in many aspects in cardiac and respiratory system. But look at, according to the Laplace law, if I have a vessels with a large diameter vessel and a small diameter vessel. Suppose the small diameter vessel is capillary. Okay, This small diameter vessel is capillary and this large diameter vessel is arterioles. In both of these vessels, I have given a luminal pressure of 25 millimeter of mercury. 25 millimeter of mercury, right? That means P in both these vessels, P is equal in both these vessels. P1 is equal to P2. Luminal pressure is same to same in both these vessels. But I can easily understand that the tension which will be generated here, okay, will be more than that of the T2 because the tension is the multiplication of this luminal pressure by radius. Because of the more radius at the level of this large vessel wall will develop more tension, so there is more chances of rupture of this large vessel rather than this small vessel. That's why we know that the capillary, although the wall is very thin, only the endothelium cell, there is no elastic tissue, no smooth muscle, no fibrous tissue, but still capillary is not rupturing in our body, and that is due to low wall tension at the level of capillary. And why the wall tension is very low at the level of capillary? Because of their smaller radius. So smaller the radius, smaller will be the wall tension, more less chances will be rupture. Okay, but because the arterioles and other artery they have large diameter, there will be more wall tension, and more wall tension means more chances of rupture, and that's why we require elastic tissue. That's why we require huge amount of smooth muscle to protect the rupture. Getting my point? That's why these vessels are equipped with more amount of elastic tissue. That's why we require huge amount of smooth muscle to protect the rupture. Getting my point? And that's why these vessels are equipped with more amount of elastic tissue, more amount of smooth muscle, right? Second application of this, suppose a normal heart and a dilated heart due to heart failure or due to dilated cardiomyopathy. So one normal heart and one dilated heart. Dilated heart. So normal heart and dilated heart. So wall tension T1 and suppose this is T2. So obviously I can understand in this cases T2 will be more than T1, means dilated heart wall tension will be more. And remember, we'll be discussing that wall tension more means the heart muscle will consume more oxygen. Oxygen requirement of the myocardium is directly proportionate to the wall tension. That's why it is asked in your question that more oxygen. Oxygen requirement of the myocardium is directly proportionate to the wall tension. That's why it is asked in your question that why dilated heart consume more oxygen than normal heart. Your answer will be according to the Laplace law. The wall tension is more in dilated heart because Laplace law is saying that luminal pressure multiplied by this R is equal to the wall tension, and wall tension is directly proportionate to the oxygen consumption of the muscles. That's why the dilated heart consume more oxygen. That is also discussed with the help of this Laplace law. Okay, and the last law that we are going to discuss is the Bernoulli's principle, right? Sure. And To Bernoulli's principle, again I have to draw a blood vessel. So suppose the blood is flowing through a vessels, right? So whenever the blood is flowing, it will exert two pressure. One pressure will be exerted on the lateral aspect of the blood vessel. So that is nothing but known as the lateral pressure. Okay, lateral pressure is due to the potential energy of the flowing blood. Potential energy, right? And this blood will also exert one end-on pressure. So this pressure is known as the end-on pressure, end pressure, which is due to the kinetic energy of the flowing blood, and kinetic energy is equal to half mv square. Okay, so this is proportional to, okay, half mv square. So this is v. Okay, this is lambda mv square. Means I can understand that this kinetic energy is directly proportionate to the velocity of the flowing blood. M is the mass and v is the velocity. Okay, so mass is constant and velocity. So more the velocity, more will be the kinetic energy, more will be the this end pressure. But what Bernoulli's principle? Bernoulli's principle is saying that the total energy of this blood flow, total energy of this blood flow, that is equal to the potential energy plus kinetic energy. This will always remain constant inside a vessel. It will always remain constant inside a vessel during the blood flow. That means whenever I am saying that PE plus KE is equal to constant, then whenever there is increase on one component, there will be decrease on the other component. And the same thing will be explained by this diagram. So look at this diagram here. Suppose this blood vessel wall, there is an atherosclerotic plaque here. So there is an atherosclerotic plaque on the inner surface of this blood vessel. So what will happen? So whenever there is, okay, constriction of the lumen aperture, okay, the cross-sectional area at this point will be lesser. If this cross-sectional area is decreased, okay, I told you already, what will happen to the velocity? Velocity is going to be high. So I can understand that this area where the atherosclerotic plaque has been formed, the velocity of blood flow will be very, very high. And whenever velocity of blood flow increases, I can understand that the kinetic energy of this portion is very huge. So what will happen to the potential energy or the lateral pressure on this part where the atherosclerotic plaque has formed? There will be decrease in potential pressure, potential energy or lateral pressure. Please remember, this potential on this part of this portion is very huge. So what will happen to the potential energy or the lateral pressure on this part where the atherosclerotic plaque has formed? There will be decrease in potential pressure, potential energy or lateral pressure. Please remember, this potential energy or this lateral pressure, it is the pressure which will try to distend the blood vessel. It is the pressure which will try to cause distension of the blood vessels. So if there is an atherosclerotic plaque on this vessel, then this distending pressure at the level of this stenotic part will be lesser. So what will happen? This will lead to more and more plaque formation. This will lead to more and more vessel constriction. Generally, we think that if there is constriction, the blood pressure will try to expand this portion. But no, we are not finding out that. We are finding out that the potential energy at that part where this constriction is already there, the potential energy will be reduced. That's why the distension force on that part will also reduce, and more atherosclerotic plaque will be deposited here, right? So this way we can explain this Bernoulli's principle here. Another important applied Bernoulli's principle application is here. So suppose this is the left ventricle and this is the arch of aorta. This is your, okay, aortic valve and it is stenosed. So aortic stenosis, right? So whenever there is aortic stenosis, I can understand that the aperture of this valve, okay, is lesser. So again the same principle will be applied, that what will happen to the velocity of the flowing blood through this aortic valve, velocity will be very, very high. Whenever velocity is very, very high, the Reynolds number will be also very, very high, and that will lead to turbulent blood flow, and turbulent blood flow will produce murmur, that we have already discussed. But now look at, in regional circulation, I will be discussing the coronary arteries. Okay, coronary perfusion. You all know that coronary arteries, they originate from this root of the aorta. So this is the area where the coronary vessels are originated. So if I ask you perfusion pressure of this coronary artery, that is due to this kinetic energy or that is due to the potential energy? Perfusion, the blood which is flowing through the coronary artery, which pressure is pushing the blood through the coronary artery? The end-on pressure or lateral pressure? Obviously lateral pressure. So I can understand that the potential energy is going to perfuse the coronary artery. But whenever there is aortic stenosis, the velocity is very, very high, due to which the kinetic energy will be higher. But Bernoulli's principle is saying total energy will remain constant. So what will happen to the potential energy? Potential energy will decrease, and that's why we can understand that the coronary perfusion pressure will be reduced, and because of which the aortic stenosis patient is more. And that's why we can understand that the coronary perfusion pressure will be reduced, and because of which the aortic stenosis patient is more prone to ischemic damage of these ventricular muscles, and because of which the aortic stenosis patient is more prone to ischemic damage of these ventricular muscles. So again, in regional circulation of this to the and the two, you understand this hemodynamics part in brief. We reduced, and because of which the aortic stenosis patient is more prone to ischemic damage of these ventricular muscles. So again, this is an application of Bernoulli's principle. I hope you understand this hemodynamics part in brief. So this is all about cardiovascular hemodynamics. Hello student, now we are going to discuss blood pressure and its regulation. So all of you know the definition of blood pressure, that it is the lateral pressure exerted on the vessel wall by the flowing blood, that we know. Now we also know, so all of you know the definition of blood pressure, that it is the lateral pressure exerted on the vessel wall by the flowing blood, that we know. Now we also know that there are different types of blood pressure, like systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, pulse pressure, and the mean arterial pressure. So we have to understand all of these different types of blood pressure and what are the determinant of these different types of blood pressure. So first I'm writing systolic blood pressure. The two main determinant of systolic blood pressure are, number one, stroke volume or cardiac output of the person, and second determinant is very, very important, that is compliance of aorta, that is compliance of aorta and major vessels, right? So How these two parameters are related to the systolic blood pressure? Systolic blood pressure will be increased due to any condition if the stroke volume or cardiac output is high, means systolic blood pressure is directly related to the stroke volume or cardiac output of the person. Similarly, if the compliance is lesser, then the systolic blood pressure will be more and more. Means systolic blood pressure is inversely proportional to the compliance of outer and major vessels. I'll discuss that what is the meaning of this compliance and how it is related. Okay, but for the time you remember the different parameter. Now the diastolic blood pressure, on the other hand, the main determinant of diastolic blood pressure is elastic recoiling elastic recoiling force of outer and major elastic tissues, right? And second determinant, all of you know this. Now the diastolic blood pressure, on the other hand, the main determinant of diastolic blood pressure is elastic recoiling elastic recoiling force of outer and major elastic tissues, right? And second determinant, all of you know this is nothing but TPR, total peripheral resistance or systemic vascular resistance. So how these are related? If the diastolic blood pressure high, that means either the elastic recoiling of the outer or major elastic vessels are high, or the TPR or the total peripheral resistance is high. Means both TPR and elastic recoiling are directly proportionate to the diastolic blood pressure. Now we'll come to this pulse pressure and mean arterial pressure a little later. But before that, let's try to understand all of these factors, that how this stroke volume and cardiac output is related to systolic blood pressure, how this compliance of the outer is related to SBP, right? So, to understand this topic, I am drawing a schematic diagram of the left ventricle. So, this is the schematic diagram of the left ventricle. So, from this left ventricle, this is the arch of aorta, right? So, this is the arch of aorta which is originating. Now, we all know that blood pressure means nothing but it is the pressure which is exerted on the lateral surface of this blood vessel, right? So, whenever the stroke volume is ejected at the level of arch of aorta, it will exert some pressure at the lateral surface of this blood vessel wall, right? So, I can easily understand that if my stroke volume is more and more, if my stroke volume is rising, so it is going to exert more pressure on this aortic vessel wall. That's why I say that stroke volume more means if the stroke volume is rising, systolic blood pressure is also going to rise, and same for the cardiac output. More the cardiac output, more will be the systolic blood pressure. Right. Now, all of you know the second part, that is the compliance of aorta, how it is related to the systolic blood pressure. So, you know the compliance, the word means, compliance means nothing but stretchability. Okay, stretchability of the vessels. So, compliance word meaning is stretchability. So, if the aorta is stiff or hard, that means low compliance. Getting my point? So, if the aorta is becoming stiffer, that means the compliance of this aorta is lesser. Hard, okay. Stretchability of the vessels. So, compliance word meaning is stretchability. So, if the aorta is stiff or hard, that means low compliance. Getting my point? So, if the aorta is becoming stiffer, that means the compliance of this aorta is lesser. So, what is happening whenever the stroke volume is ejected by the ventricle? Arch of aorta also expanded proportionate to this stroke volume. There will be expansion of the arch of aorta because it contains huge amount of elastic tissue. So whenever you are ejecting stroke volume, what will happen? This arch of aorta will also get expanded. There will be expansion of this arch of aorta. Now remember, this expansion More the expansion, more is the compliance, more is the stretchability. So whenever a vessel is expanding, it is absorbing the pressure. Getting my point? So expansion means it is dampening the pressure. So if the vessel wall becomes stiffer, so it is not able to expand. It is becoming stiffer. It is becoming hard. That means the compliance of the vessel is low. So what do you think? If the same stroke volume is injected in this condition, the vessel is not able to expand, the vessel is not able to absorb the pressure. So what will happen to the pressure which will be exerted on this wall? Obviously this pressure is going to be exerted more. That means more stiffer the vessel wall, more harder the vessel wall, the same amount of stroke volume is going to exert more pressure. That's why I told you that systolic blood pressure and compliance, the relationship is inverse. Lesser the compliance, more will be the systolic blood pressure. This is very important. I will give you one clinical example just after this, but first try to understand the different determinant of this systolic blood pressure. Right. Now coming to the diastolic blood pressure. So I told you that diastolic blood pressure, the determinant are elastic recoiling of the arch of aorta. So the similar kind of schematic diagram, the left ventricle and the arch of aorta, right? So whenever the stroke volume is ejected, I just told that this arch of aorta is going to be expanded like this. Okay, expanded like this. Now, diastolic blood pressure, by definition, it is the blood pressure which is exerted on the vessel wall during diastole of the heart. Like systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, by definition, it is the blood pressure which is exerted on the vessel wall during diastole of the heart. Like systolic blood pressure, that is the blood pressure which is exerted during systole. So here, the ventricle will be in the state of diastole. So during diastole, we all know that this semilunar valve will be closed and the ventricle will relaxes more and more. That is the diastole, right? So if I ask you that during diastole, ventricle is not ejecting any stroke volume. So what do you think? The blood which is present in the vessel, that is going to flow or not? The flow will stop. Obviously, the flow is not going to stop. The flow is continuous. That means I can understand that although these semilunar valves are closed, no one is pushing the blood from ventricle, but still blood flow is continuous inside the vessel even during the diastole of the heart. So question is, who is pushing the blood from behind so that there is continuous flow even during the diastole of the heart? Getting my point? That is the biggest question. So during diastole, somebody is pushing the blood because of which the constant blood flow is maintained. Now, why this constant blood flow is required? Suppose the blood flow is completely stopped. What do you think? What will be the pressure on this vessel wall? The blood pressure will be how much if the blood flow is completely stopped? Suppose there is a sudden cardiac arrest. What will be the pressure inside the vessel? Do you think that will be zero? Answer is not zero. That will be near equal to 7 millimeter of mercury, and this blood pressure, this pressure is known as the mean systemic filling pressure. Mean systemic filling pressure, right? Please remember this name, mean systemic filling pressure. Okay, so whenever the blood flow is stopped, okay, the pressure that will be exerted on the vessel wall is very minimum, but that is not zero. That is near equal to 7 millimeter of mercury. That is known as mean systemic filling pressure. Okay, now we all know our diastolic blood pressure is 80 millimeter of mercury. That means it is way above this 7 millimeter of mercury. So that means blood is flowing even during diastole, and that's why the pressure is not 7. It is more than 7, and that is near equal to 80 millimeter of mercury. So my question is that whoever is maintaining this constant blood flow, that is the major determinant of this diastolic blood pressure. So now look at who is maintaining this diastolic blood flow. So whenever the stroke volume is ejected, I told you already that arch of aorta will be expanded. Whenever this semilunar valve is closed, this arch of aorta is going to be recoil back. Now, whenever the arch of aorta is recoiling back, it is going to exert some pressure on the blood which is present at the level of arch of aorta. Because of the pressure, what will happen? This blood will be pushed forward. And again, when the blood is reaching here, again it will causes elastic expansion of this vessel wall again, right? And again this vessel wall is going to be recoil back. Whenever it is recoiling back, again it is going to cause expansion of the vessel wall, and again that vessel wall will recoil back. So that way I can understand that there is an elastic expansion followed by recoiling, elastic expansion followed by recoiling. A wave is going through this vessel wall. This expansion, recoiling, a wave is going through the vessel. You can feel at the level of artery this expansion and recoiling, and that is nothing but your pulse. Getting my point? So basically, the pulse which you feel at the level of artery, whether it is radial artery or any artery, that is nothing but due to elastic expansion and recoiling of the major arteries and arch of aorta. So whenever the arch of aorta is expanding, okay, then it will recoil back, and that is pushing the blood, and that pushing means the blood will move in the forward direction. Again, there will be expansion recoiling this way. A wave will travel through the arterial tree, and this velocity of this wave is very, very fast. It is 15 to 35 meter per second. This means this pulse wave velocity is running at a very faster rate through the arterial wall, and whenever you feel here, okay, you can easily feel the arterial expansion and recoiling. Getting my point? So now I can understand that even during the diastole, some force is pushing the blood, and that force is not elastic recoiling of aorta. And that's why I told you this has been asked in AIMS entrance examination, that what is the major factor for diastolic blood pressure? Your answer is elastic recoiling of aorta and major vessel. More the elastic recoiling of aorta, more will be the diastolic blood pressure. Right? This is the important thing. Now, second thing is that if they are increasing peripheral resistance, so suppose there is increasing resistance of that is the peripheral resistance. We have discussed in hemodynamics what is the meaning of peripheral resistance. So whenever this resistance is increased, I can understand, okay, behind this high resistance portion, there will be accumulation of a little more blood. So that is going to exert more pressure on this vessel wall, and that's why we say that more the total peripheral resistance, more will be the diastolic blood pressure, right? Diastolic blood pressure. So that's where we can understand the diastolic blood pressure determinant are two, that is TPR and elastic recoiling of aorta, right? Okay. Now coming to the pulse pressure. Now pulse pressure, all of you know that it is nothing but difference between this systolic blood pressure minus diastolic blood pressure, right? So difference between SBP minus DBP is nothing but our pulse pressure. We all know that. But you remember that ratio between stroke volume and compliance of aorta, ratio between stroke volume and compliance of aorta is also the pulse pressure. Getting the point? So this is clearly written in guidance that the ratio between stroke volume upon compliance of aorta is the pulse pressure, right? So we have to understand why the ratio between stroke volume and compliance is equal to pulse pressure, right? So again, the same diagram I am discussing here. So this diagram we have already discussed that when recoiling during diastole. Now, my question is, I want to measure what is the compliance of this aorta. I want to measure the compliance. I told you compliance is inverse of elasticity. Compliance is equal to stretchability, right? Compliance is equal to stretchability. In respiratory system, you will understand this formula a little better way. But for the time being, remember the compliance is equal to stretchability, and it is measured mathematically by delta V upon delta P formula. So delta V is the volume change and delta P is the pressure change. So if you change unit amount of pressure, how much volume change is going to happen, that is the measure of compliance. So if you change a little amount of pressure, how much volume is changing, that is my compliance. So I want to measure the compliance of this aorta, right? So what I need to measure what is the volume change of this arch of aorta, and for that volume change, how much pressure is changing, right? So during systole, the stroke volume is ejected, and because of the ejection of the blood pressure which is exerted here, that is nothing but the systolic blood pressure. And when the semilunar valves are closed, then the pressure which will be exerted on this vessel, that is the minimum pressure, that is nothing but the diastolic blood pressure. We have discussed already that systolic blood pressure means maximum blood pressure which is exerted during the systole of the heart, and diastolic blood pressure when the semilunar valves are closed. So if I ask you that how much pressure at the and because of the ejection blood, the blood pressure which is exerted here, that is nothing but the systolic blood pressure. And when the semilunar valves are closed, then the pressure which will be exerted on this vessel, that is the minimum pressure, that is nothing but diastolic blood pressure. We have discussed already that systolic blood pressure means maximum blood pressure which is exerted during the systole of the heart, and diastolic blood pressure when the semilunar valves are closed. But systolic blood pressure, and when the semilunar valves are closed, then the pressure which will be exerted on this vessel, that is the minimum pressure, that is nothing but the diastolic blood pressure. That systolic blood pressure means maximum blood pressure which is exerted during the systole, and diastolic blood pressure when the semilunar valves are closed. So if I ask you that how much pressure is changing at the level of this arch of aorta during systole and diastole, I am asking you that tell me how much is the delta P, how much pressure is changing at the level of arch of aorta between systole and diastole. So during systole, the pressure will rise to systolic blood pressure, and during diastole, the pressure will decrease to diastolic blood pressure. That means the change of pressure or delta P at the level of arch of aorta is between systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure. Systolic, diastolic, that is the change of pressure. If I ask you why this pressure change is occurring, your answer will be that this is due to ejection of this volume. Which volume? The stroke volume. Because you are ejecting stroke volume, that's why the diastolic blood pressure is rising to systolic blood pressure. That means I can understand that at the level of arch of aorta, the volume change is occurring that is equal to stroke volume, and because of this volume change, the pressure change that is occurring is SBP minus DBP, and SBP minus DBP is nothing but the pulse pressure. That means in this compliance equation, I can easily put that stroke volume upon pulse pressure is the compliance of aorta. So I can easily say that pulse pressure is equal to nothing but stroke volume upon compliance of aorta. Getting my point? So that's why the Guyton is writing, okay, although the explanation is not given, but Guyton is writing upon compliance of aorta. Getting my point? So that's why the Guyton is writing, okay, although the explanation is not given, but Guyton is writing that stroke volume upon your compliance of aorta is nothing but your pulse pressure. Got it? So this is about pulse pressure, right? Now the last one is the mean arterial pressure. Now whenever we are saying mean arterial pressure, by definition, we know mean arterial pressure is nothing but average pressure throughout the cardiac cycle, right? So during cardiac cycle, blood pressure will fluctuate, systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure. But if I take an average, if I take a mean, then what is that blood pressure? That is known as the mean arterial pressure. Generally, we say that mean arterial pressure is equal to cardiac output multiplied by total peripheral resistance. If you do, then you are going to get your mean arterial pressure. But both of this measurement is difficult, so that's why we use a simplified formula, and that simplified formula is diastolic blood pressure plus 1/3 of pulse pressure. Diastolic blood pressure plus